Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Breda Pest Management. I have got to tell you, we have got something really, really fun we're going to do in just a moment. For those of you who are enjoying the Alabama misery, the meltdown that's been taking place in Tuscaloosa, there is a new chapter in that's being written today. And in a roundabout way, it sort of involves Georgia and Kirby Smart in particular. And this is maybe something you've thought about, maybe something you haven't thought about, but you better believe Alabama fans are thinking pretty closely about all of this. I'm going to give this to you here coming up in just a moment. I think it's going to be really fun. Also, we have not caught up with our friend from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Chip Towers, in a while on the show. But there are a couple of reasons in particular I want to have Chip on the show today. So we're going to do that here in just a little bit. And I also thought this might be fun. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's off week. We're kind of relaxed. You know, I got the sweater on, got the Gator Hater t-shirt on, by the way, getting ready to hate on those Gators coming up in a little bit. We're in a little bit of a relaxed mood today. So here's what I was thinking. What if for a couple of minutes off the top of the show, for those of you that join us early but can't stay with us for the full thing, I was going to give you just a few minutes of comments here. And then after that, we're going to bump into the show and we'll get rolling. And I'm going to give you some great stuff on how Georgia right now is kind of at the center of the Alabama meltdown. We'll update Kirby Smart on injuries from yesterday. We're going to do a bunch of stuff. But what do you say for a couple of minutes, we take a couple of comments. We don't normally do this. A lot of days we don't have time to. Today we kind of do. So we'll do some of this here and have a good time and then get rolling with the with the show after that. Senior Dog 54, by the way, in our DawgNation comment section. If you ever want to be a part of morning comments with us, you can always go to DawgNation.com and be a part of our First and 15 there. 9:45 on the DawgNation homepage of the DawgNation app. Senior Dog 54 says, hope we do the opposite of everything that Alabama did on defense. Yeah, I mean, I know that we'll eventually talk more about this, but, I mean, Nick Saban made it very clear. He thought his team was too soft defensively, especially late in that game against Tennessee. Now, is that Saban kind of casting blame in the direction of his defensive coordinator, Pete Golding? That's not the kind of thing that Saban's been afraid to do in the past. Maybe that's what he's doing right now there as well. But it is a pretty keen warning for Georgia. I know Kirby Smart talked some about pass rush yesterday. Eventually on this show, we'll play you some of what he said on that when we have more time to do it. But it is pretty obvious that Georgia has to have an aggressive approach defensively against Tennessee. You can't drop a bunch of guys back in coverage and sort of hope for the best. You've got to go out there and make something happen. And there's obviously an additional risk that's associated with that. We don't deny that when you play more aggressively, there's a reason they call it aggressive. You are risking something to gain something. But I truly believe that's the only way to win a national championship. You have to have that edge defensively. You have to go out there and try to negate someone else's big moments to create moments of your own. One of the things I've said a lot is I thought last year Georgia played defense with an offensive mindset. They weren't just trying to stop something from happening, which is, if you think about it, it's kind of the prime directive of a defense. You're supposed to stop the offense from doing what it wants to do. Last year, Georgia wasn't just trying to stop you defensively. They were trying to create something themselves defensively. They were trying to score or trying to get a turnover that gave the offense short field and gave it a chance to score. That Georgia last year played defense with an offensive mindset. And I think you probably have to do some of that here this year there too. Let's get some YouTube comments there as well. And if you're just joining us, we're a little bit relaxed today. We're going to have a really fun show coming up in a moment. But I also just kind of celebration of the off week, whatever else. Just wanted to take a couple of comments off the top of the show here on our various video platforms before we get rolling with the show as you've kind of come to expect it. Green Soldier checks in to say Alabama's secondary had one of its worst games I've ever seen under Nick Saban, passing guys off without proper communication, guys sticking on zones while someone passed them by. It seemed like you did see a lot of that. And as you said, a lot of that goes back to Nick Saban because not only is he a defensive-minded head coach, but he's a head coach that specifically has always been interested in that defensive back play. And right now, Alabama does not have an elite secondary. They've got good talent over there. No one would deny that. Terry Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry and a lot of those guys are big-name talents, but it's not adding up to what it's supposed to for Alabama right now. That is indeed the case. Foster Moss pointing out that I am wearing – one of our YouTube commenters calls himself BA's cardigan, and I'm actually wearing the cardigan of BA's cardigan fame today. I am doing that, so I'm sure I'll probably get some grief for that here at some point in time. But listen, here in the Atlanta area where I live, it's cold today. It is cold today indeed. So you better believe I was looking for every layer I could get. But listen, still wanting to show off that Gator Hater shirt. By the way, in our DawgNation store, top of the page, DawgNation.com, or simply by going to DawgNation.store. The original Gator Hater logo is back. You can get the original Gator Hater t-shirt in there, which I'm really excited about for sure. Let's get a couple more here. Chase White says, do you think UG will play 2 stars on Tennessee? That's an interesting idea, playing that 6th defensive back. I think that's probably the kind of thing that you'd see them do some, if not a lot. I know against LSU in 2019, they actually played 7 defensive backs some. I didn't like that defensive game plan at all, and I'm not an X's and O's guy. I'm not a former player. I'm not a former coach. I just thought against LSU in 2019, which is the offense right now this current Tennessee team is being compared to, I thought against LSU in 2019, Georgia dropped so many guys back in pass coverage. Oftentimes, it's like 7 guys. They just didn't have enough of a pass rush even on the field. I just didn't think they had enough bodies devoted to getting to the backfield. I thought they gave Joe Burrow way too much time to operate that day. And a quarterback of that caliber with that much time to throw, even with a bunch of guys dropping back into coverage, eventually just sort of figure it out. And I thought that kind of happened for Alabama on Saturday too, that Hendon Hooker just figured it out. And a guy like Jalen Hyatt had 5 touchdowns. So while, yeah, I don't mind you playing a little dime coverage, things like that. I don't mind that. I mean, I'm guessing you probably have to some. But I don't want to see the kind of thing where you had against LSU in 19 where it's so many guys drop into coverage that you don't have anybody to get after that quarterback. Because that's just really the name of the game for me. Foster Moss says, I hope they drop the Kirby halftime speech next week. Obviously, a lot of folks remember the great speech that Kirby gave at halftime of the game last year. It got leaked. It wasn't an official Georgia thing. Somebody just recorded it and shared it. And typically speaking, we think when some of these things kind of leak out, and just knowing how, like, that would be an unpardonable offense to reveal something in the locker room that was not a sanctioned leak. That'd be, for a staffer, that'd be a fireable offense. For a player, gosh knows how bad that would be. That's just not the kind of thing that happens at Georgia. But when something does leak, think about the Jalen Carter play at practice from a couple of years ago, the George Pickens viral catch from the first scrimmage he participated in, Kirby Smart's halftime speech, the I want you to eat speech from whatever game that was. I think it was probably 2018 SEC Championship. When some of these things leak out, typically speaking, we're left to conclude it must have been a sanctioned leak. Last year's halftime speech for Kirby against Florida was an all-timer. We had to edit it ourselves and played it on here just simply because it's too profane for a family-friendly show like the one we're trying to operate. But indeed, it was an all-timer, and it'll certainly get you fired up. It clearly got Georgia fired up last year. Zelo Allen says you can't put 6 DBs on the field if your 3 defensive linemen can't get pressure. And I think that's 100% right. That Georgia right now has got to think about what it's going to dial up to get that pressure. Sending more linebackers, doing things like that. They're just going to have to be more aggressive doing that. And I realize there's a risk for that. And it's not my neck that's on the line if it doesn't work out. I understand that. That when I say, hey, you got to do whatever you can do to create pressure, I'm not the one that has to deal with the ramifications of it going wrong the way the Georgia defensive coaches are. I understand that. They have so much more to think about on this. And I know one of the things that Kirby talked about yesterday was they've kind of clocked it about how much quicker teams are getting rid of the football now, to the point where it's only about 3 seconds. And, Auburn was a little slower than that, but everybody else is a little bit faster than that. Like, I get the challenges of this, but I'm telling you right now, you have got to put quarterbacks on their back, especially guys like Hooker. You just got to do it. It's got to happen. All right, a couple of more comments, and we're going to get ready to get the show started here for today. Let's see what else. What else is going on here? Bill Sanders says somebody forgot to shut the back door to the Arctic. I'm not a fan. Bill, I'm right there with you on that. It is colder today than I'd like for it to be. Colder today than I would like for it to be. Pete Williams and Barry Tenahan talking about the temptation to look past opponents. I was going to do this on the show today. We're going to do it tomorrow instead. Kirby gave you some great stuff on this yesterday. Great stuff. And if I didn't have something fun today that I wanted to do, we'd be spending a lot of time talking about what he talked about yesterday, but we'll get to it tomorrow eventually. Good to see Dana Turk checking in. She says, I'm freezing. Dana, we're right there with you on that. However, Phil Rogers reminding us it's 50 in Jacksonville, so the Florida First Coast never disappoints. And to be 50 today when it's 30 here makes me long for the those great waters around Amelia Island and Jacksonville Beach or wherever it is that you all like to go. It'd be nice to be there for the cocktail party right now because it's way warmer there than it is here. Trust me when I tell you, Dog Nation is freezing today. All right, so let's remind you what we have going on for today's show. It is Chip Towers back on the program. We have not had Chip in a while, and I wanted to catch up with him on a couple of different topics. One of those related to just the historic nature of what Georgia's about to go through here over the course of the next few weeks, and after seeing Georgia play for 7 games. For the good, the bad, and everything else in between, how does he compare this year's team to last year's team? We'll do that with Chip here coming up in just a moment. Kirby Smart did speak last night, gave you some key updates on important Georgia injuries. We will talk about that here coming up a little bit today there as well. And off the top of the program, y'all, this is just too fun not to really wallow in for a moment. Alabama fans are having a total, absolute meltdown. A couple of these things you may be aware of, something new you may not be aware of yet, and in a roundabout way, it sort of involves Georgia and Kirby Smart in particular. This is so juicy. You'll get a big kick out of this. Just for fun, we are going to mock the Crimson Tide unmercifully as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So not everybody's on Twitter. Not everybody, kind of participates on that social medium. But I did put out a little bit of a message yesterday, and it's in relationship to something we've talked about a couple of days here on DawgNation Daily. My sincere apology to some Georgia fans. If you'll remember on yesterday's show, and you should go back and check out the full show yesterday if you missed part of it, near the end, we played the reaction from Georgia fans to Tennessee beating Alabama on Saturday. There's this huge cheer that erupted. It kind of went out. And what we kind of question is, does it make sense for Georgia fans to be cheering for Tennessee that much in a game against Alabama? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We've done this now a couple of days. But we kind of debated this yesterday. And what I said on Twitter yesterday was, to any Georgia fan who did cheer for Tennessee in that spot, for any Georgia fan who wanted to see Alabama lose, I sent out a sincere apology yesterday for ever doubting the logic that went behind your choice, because in retrospect, watching Alabama lose really is about the most entertaining thing that you'll ever get a chance to see. It is hilarious. I have to admit this. It's really, really funny to watch Alabama lose, and I don't mind telling you that. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. First of all, you probably have seen this by now. There is a massive conspiracy afoot in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It doesn't take much to get conspiracies going at a place like that, but there is a massive conspiracy that's just kind of running wild in the Yellowhammer State here right now. I want to show you this. I think we have the video here. This is from Touchdown Alabama magazine. Now, the question being asked here is, and we can just kind of let this play for a second. We can loop it if we need to. It says, did the head referee during the Alabama-Tennessee game celebrate Tennessee scoring a touchdown? And the caption says, you be the judge, with eyeball emojis. Now, if you're listening radio podcast, we really try not to do too much around here that's video only, because we obviously have, great respect for our audio audience. But you got to see this. Many of you probably have. So the referee gives you the touchdown signal, and then when his hands come down, he kind of does a little bit of a fist, what appears to be, to the Alabama fans, a little bit of a fist pump type thing. And in like classic conspiratorial fashion, the Touchdown Alabama tweet here has kind of given you a slow motion. So you show the referee there in real time, and then they do a slow motion deal of the referee bringing his hands down with his fist clenched as if he's celebrating the touchdown. And so that gives you an idea of just how ludicrous and just how nonsense all the Alabama fans, their reaction is to them losing. So to Georgia fans who had the premonition that this would be fun to see and fun to watch unfold over the course of the last few days, for one of many times I'm sure in my life I'll say this, you were right, I was wrong. This really is as much fun as you thought it would be, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as you figured you would, because my guess is you probably are. But wait, that's not all. Did you know there's even more meltdown stuff going on? And this is kind of just starting to percolate but it's popping off in a couple of different places here. And in a roundabout way, this kind of involves Georgia. And this is something that I think you're going to really, really like. Now, let me before I kind of get into this, let me kind of get into a quick aside here, and then we'll kind of get back to having fun again. A lot of what we're about to say is going to be in relationship to Scott Cochran, who Georgia hired a couple of years ago to be its special teams coach. A lot of you know Scott's been kind of going through a little bit of a personal journey right now that's taken him off the field from Georgia as an on-field coach. He's still around the Georgia program. I see him pretty frequently after games. Almost always has a big smile on his face when I see him. I know he's kind of talked a little bit about the journey that he's been on. So there is some stuff related to Scott Cochran that's obviously very serious and very, very far removed from football. And I say this with all sincerity. I know many of you agree that we continue to pray for Scott. We're so happy that he's still around the football program. We hope that every step that he takes from here on out is just as successful as the recent steps have been. So there's an element of Scott Cochran's life right now that's more serious than football, and we take that really, really seriously around here. He is genuinely, authentically in our prayers, and we mean that wholeheartedly. So let's not get what we're about to talk about twisted here, because we're about to have some fun as it relates to Scott Cochran. But there's a very serious part of the Cochran story that we continue to root really, really hard for him on. Now that we've said that, let's make this fun again. When Georgia, Kirby Smart in particular, hired Scott Cochran away, how many Bama fans did you hear from who, after Cochran had been such an important part of that Alabama program? I mean, our buddy Mike Johnson, some of you have been with us for a long time, know Mike, former Alabama player, All-American in Alabama, a colleague of mine. We used to do a show together called SEC Country Live. We still kind of pop up and do some stuff together from time to time. I mean, Mike will tell you that Scott Cochran was the most beloved figure in the Alabama program to a bunch of players. They kind of viewed him as their guy. He was their liaison to the other coaches, certainly to Nick Saban. Mike's kind of said he was the head coach of the offseason because coaches are limited in their contact. Guys like Mike Johnson and a million others will tell you that Scott Cochran, who was hired away by Kirby Smart, was one of the most important figures at Alabama as both a strength and conditioning coach, but also a spiritual leader for that organization. And yet when Kirby hired him away, there were a bunch of Alabama folks, and by the way, some of these weren't just fans. Some of these were a little bit more high up types who were like, good riddance. Let's get rid of that guy and his antiquated strength and conditioning style. Let's bring in a bunch of smart folks, a bunch of PhDs, a bunch of, cutting edge exercise science types. Let's do things in kind of a newfangled way. Scott Cochran doesn't know how to do that. He's just a rah-rah guy. He's coach, or whatever it was that people would kind of say about him. Glad to have him gone here. And, we kind of said at the time that Scott Cochran clearly had a career ambition. He wanted to be a coach. And the fact that Nick Saban wasn't willing to give him any opportunity to grow professionally sort of speaks to what we believe about Nick Saban. He is unquestionably the greatest coach, probably of all time. I'm not quite so sure there's enough evidence to say that Nick Saban's a good guy. If Saban was on trial for being a good guy, would there be enough evidence to convict him? I'm honestly not sure there would be. And I think the way in which he kind of handled the end of the Cochran era at Alabama may be an example of that. But Alabama fans didn't care. They hired some PhD, some professor, some smart dude who's going to come down here, going to revolutionize Alabama strength and conditioning. Suddenly every injury that ever happened in the Alabama program was all Scott Cochran's fault. You remember this. Nick Saban himself kind of contributed to that some, and don't think we didn't notice that when Saban used that as one of his myriad excuses at any point in time that Saban's needed to push that button on all of that. Well, now, lo and behold, Alabama's losing to Tennessee on Saturday, and suddenly there are a lot of folks looking around saying, hold on, things used to be better around here. What's different now than it used to be? Oh, yeah, Kirby Smart came in here and hired one of our guys a couple of years ago. Let me start with Paul Finebaum from his radio show on Monday. If you're a Georgia fan, you're going to laugh at this. This is Finebaum.
But ultimately, and I know people don't want to hear me say that, everything comes around to the man in charge, and decisions have been made. I mean, you remember a couple of years ago when Scott Cochran went to Georgia, everybody said Alabama was much better off. They brought in these high-tech guys, with the GPSs on your wrist type of fella. I mean, sometimes you do need the raw emotion that I wonder if Alabama has lost a little bit of that edge.
So I don't know if what Paul Finebaum is saying is true or not. Now, I do think the way in which they fell all over themselves because they hired a bunch of smart dudes a bunch of, nerdy exercise geeks to come down here and teach them how to do strength and conditioning right. I do think that was overblown from the start, and we said that at the time. But the idea that somehow Georgia, Kirby Smart in particular, hiring Scott Cochran away has taken an edge away from Alabama, I don't know if that's true or not, but I hope it is. Boy, doesn't that sound great? The idea that Kirby Smart continues to damage Alabama just by being Kirby Smart, and that a couple of years ago he took Scott Cochran away from that program, and at the time Alabama fans were like, "We don't care. We got these smart dudes. We got these professors. We got these calculators going to come down here and they're going to show us how to do science. They're going to come down here and start doing science." And then later on, you're like, "Hey, remember how tough we used to be? Remember how mean and nasty we used to be? Remember how much of an edge we used to have? We don't have that anymore. What's different? Oh, yeah, we lost that Scott Cochran guy. The guy that every Alabama player of that era would have told you was critically important to the program. All of a sudden now, maybe that is the case. And by the way, it's not just Paul Finebaum who's saying this. Remember Touchdown Alabama magazine, who had the conspiratorial video of the referee giving you the fist bump celebration? They quoted a former Alabama receiver the other day. Let me show you. I just love it. Let me show you this for a second. This is former Alabama receiver. His name is Mike McCoy. Once again, quoted by Touchdown Alabama magazine. They took a break from trying to unearth the referee gate conspiracy. To quote, McCoy is saying this about the current state of college football. He says, "It's the wild, wild west now. A lot of these kids are going to the highest bidder. So now that these schools have the same money as you, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to be different? Are you going to revert back to your old ways?" Now, listen, here's what he says. I actually don't even really get the first part of that too much, but I guess what he's saying is these kids these days are hard to reach. Alabama sort of reached the, these kids these days phase of their deliberations here. But McCoy's basically saying, kids today, they're hard to reach. So his solution to this is a former Alabama player quoted via Touchdown Alabama magazine. He says, "You better call Cochran because the sidelines look dead over there to me. Did it not look dead to you?" Once again, that's Mike McCoy, former Bama player, quoted by Touchdown Alabama magazine, saying that he looks at that Alabama sideline and says it looks dead, and that Scott Cochran used to be the guy that was responsible for that not looking dead over there. And with Cochran now being at Georgia, Alabama's really missing something, and Paul Finebaum's kind of saying the same thing from his perspective there, too, of, Alabama's missing an edge, and hiring a guy like Scott Cochran away may be the thing that's taken Alabama's edge. My only point here is this. I don't know if it's true, but I hope it is. I love the idea that Kirby Smart, who, by the way, they have never played defense the same way since Kirby left, and everybody knows that. Even Bama fans themselves are begrudgingly starting to admit that. So the idea that all these years later, Kirby's still kind of finding that way to damage that Bama program, still taking that edge away, taking that. It's not just the physical toughness that Alabama's lost. There's a certain level of mental toughness this program doesn't seem to have either. 17 penalties against Tennessee, probably the example of that. And who knows, maybe they find it before the year is done. They're still going to be ranked in the top whatever and have a chance to win the national championship. But something's different. Something just sort of appears to be different. And on this day, there's a handful of folks saying that Kirby Smart might have contributed to what has made Alabama different, or maybe made them a little bit worse. And if you're a Georgia fan, I think you view that as pretty good news. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon. Athens Sports Radio 960, The Ref, podcast, the Apple Player, Spotify, all kinds of ways for you to connect with us, and we are really happy to have you with us no matter how you do it. Just try to make the show as available in many different ways we can and let you choose which one makes sense for you. By the way, if you're watching a video, you see it right there. Hashtag Go for 2 in 22. That's the mission that Georgia's on right now. Big games loom as a way of getting that done, but that's where our focus is right now. It's Gator Hater first. It's Go for 2 in 22 after that, and we are getting ready for all of it. And by the way, we have great sponsors that help us go on this journey each and every week, including our friends at Breda Pest Management. Now, Breda Pest Management is a great organization. A lot of you may know this. They're the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. Now, Dogs have a pest coming in about 3 weeks' time. That's going to be the Tennessee Vols, and Georgia will be looking to extract them from the stadium with a loss. And that's the same kind of work that Breda Pest Management does all the time when it comes to termites and things like that. Because if you think about a field surface the size of Sanford Stadium, on that space, there's room for like millions and millions of termites. And obviously, when it comes to your own home, especially in Georgia, where termites are just sort of a fact of life, you got to be ready for them. You got to have some sort of defense against them. No better defense than what Breda Pest Management provides. If you can fit that many on the field at Sanford Stadium, imagine how many could be fit all around your house and how much damage they could do over the course of time. They are silent killers, silent destroyers when it comes to your house there. So your friends at Breda Pest Management want to protect you. Now, here's the thing. You may say, well, I've already got pest control. I've already got somebody taking care of my termite stuff. Well, here's what I know. Every single year, you're probably getting that letter in the mail that says your cost of service is going up. Over the course of the last few months, everything has gone up. This is what I want you to know about Breda Pest Management, because the resource they have at their disposal, the fact they've been in business since the 1970s, the fact they've got 100-plus employees spread out across the metro Atlanta and the state of Georgia, that creates a certain level of strength that can be leveraged to your benefit. When you make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection, for your pest control service, you're going to save money instantly just for doing that. So my invitation to you, and you should do this, is reach out to them online, bredapest.com. That's BREDA, bredapest.com, and you can get involved with our friends at Breda Pest Management. All right, here on the show, coming up in a couple of minutes, we have not had him on in a while, but I've been wanting to catch up with him today. Seems like a really good day to do that. We're going to welcome in Chip Towers here coming up in a moment from our friends at the AJC. There are a couple of things in particular I want to talk to Chip about, and we'll do that here in just a little bit. But before that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse, and there are a couple of pretty important injury updates that Kirby Smart gave yesterday. We're going to get more later on in the week, kind of some of the stuff that Kirby said. His only media availability of the week kind of came last night, and we're going to get more deeply into that. But for now, I know one of the things that's on a lot of fans' mind, my mind included, is kind of what's going on the injury front right now. So let's get ready to do this. First of all, A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver, Jalen Carter, most important defensive player. Think about Kendall Milton, who didn't play this past Saturday. Handful of injuries here right now. Kirby Smart was good enough to give us some information on that yesterday. So let you hear Kirby on the topic of these injuries right now. This is Kirby from last night.
Very promising on Smile. He went today more than he's gone in 2 weeks and was in drills and did things and moved around. I would not say that he was 100%, but the fact he was out there, did punt team, he covered people. He's not 100%, but he did way more than he's done the last few weeks. I feel really good about where Smile's at. I didn't get to see AD much. He's still not able to go in our drill work. He did condition with us and run and looked better. Jalen's continuing to work on the MCL, and he's not out there with us conditioning. He does his in the training room and the weight room. He does stuff with those guys because of where he's at with the MCL. Who's the last one? Kendall felt better. He ran yesterday and today, but he did not practice and rep with us. He did just straight line running.
You know that one GIF that a lot of people use? It's popular where it's like Eli Manning, and he's getting excited, and then he kind of like deflates a little bit. You can sort of visually see him kind of come down off the high feeling that he was experiencing. I kind of got that, listen to that clip. I mean, Kirby gives you Smile Monday, and you're like, yeah, that sounds great. And then it's A.D. Mitchell, and then Jalen Carter, and then Kendall Milton, and the issue that you got with both Mitchell and Carter and Milton is sort of all related to limitations at practice. And that's what really matters to me here right now is, like, I'm not a doctor. I don't have any idea, where these guys are on their road to medical recovery. But if they're this limited in practice right now, you kind of wonder how healthy they could be for next Saturday against Florida. And when Connor Riley was with us yesterday, he kind of acknowledged a little bit of pessimism maybe on the part of Mitchell, but he sort of struck a more hopeful tone when it relates to Jalen Carter. I was a little bit surprised by what he said. And, based on what Kirby just said about Carter right there, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just misreading all of this. And if you think that I am, I'd love to hear from you on that. But you certainly sort of get the impression that right now you're talking about, a limitation on kind of a full return to practice for any of those guys. And if you're not quite fully back at practice yet, then think about the journey you still have to go on to be ready to play again next Saturday. As I said, I'll ask Chip Towers about this when he joins us here coming up in a couple of minutes, that maybe for me this is all just a little bit of a misread. But that is sort of the sense that I get, is that I didn't quite get the news I was hoping for when it relates to A.D. Mitchell. We saw Mitchell try to give it a go against Auburn a couple of weeks ago, and that was a little bit of a false start, just not quite ready to do that as of yet. Kirby also mentioned kind of a different injury that he was dealing with, but didn't seem like he was even running, quite as well as a fully healthy wide receiver would. And then last Saturday, obviously, he was kind of pulled back, and you expect that to happen. But in the case of Jalen Carter, I don't know that we've yet heard that news about him moving in that direction where you're like, yeah, that's the really big first sign that he's on his way back. And I kind of briefly asked the question yesterday, that does Georgia have kind of an irreplaceable player on this team right now? I think one of the great strengths of the 2021 team is that I don't believe it had an irreplaceable player. I don't believe there was any one player that Georgia could have lost that would have completely ended its chance of winning a national championship. Jordan Davis may have been the closest thing that Georgia had a year ago, but I don't even know that he would necessarily be that necessarily. I just don't know that Georgia had a truly irreplaceable player. Well, when you think about, what's about to happen with Florida and Tennessee and programs like that Georgia has upcoming on its schedule, does Carter feel like an irreplaceable player on this year's team? Georgia's played with him for a while, so maybe you say no, they're getting used to not playing with him. But gosh, I still feel like he's sort of the best overall guy on this program, and eventually you'd like to hear some good news on that. I don't know that yesterday we did, although maybe I'm just misinterpreting all this. One more injury thing here. Wide receiver Ladd McConkey, and Kirby continues to reiterate the fact that he doesn't think the McConkey thing is all that serious. This is Kirby again on that topic.
Ladd's good. Ladd could have gone back in. Ladd's fine, but Ladd has a toe injury. I mentioned to you guys before. This is different than the ankle. So with the ankle and the toe, we're giving him some medicine and taking care of him, and he's going to cut back some this week. But again, he could have come back in the game, and he could play this Saturday if we're playing this Saturday. But we're going to shut him down for a little bit, for a couple of days, and try to get some medicine in there and try to get him back for the stretch run so he can go.
So one of the things that Kirby also talked about yesterday is at some point in time we'll get more into that this week, but he kind of talked about the value of being a space player. You're tempted to want to say, hey, let's just put 1,000 tight ends on the field and let these guys do all their stuff. But one of the things that Kirby kind of talked about was, hey, you got to have guys that can kind of make some things happen in space, what they're able to create. Like, go back to the Oregon game here for a moment. That's something that McConkey proved to be really, really valuable with. And as you start thinking about later on the season, getting more of that from him is probably pretty important too. I know he had a little bit of a rough stretch there for a while, but I don't think that changes the fact that McConkey is still a really important player on the Georgia roster. So if you're a Georgia fan kind of looking for some good injury news where you can get it, maybe that on Ladd McConkey, a little bit of an example of that, because finding a way to strike your own big plays when you're competing against a team like, say, Tennessee, or really any team left on the Georgia schedule that's going to want to strike for their big plays, that's going to be pretty important. So maybe some good news on Ladd McConkey there on that front. All right, we're going to catch up with Chip Towers here, hopefully coming up in just a moment. Let me also remind you that oftentimes here on a Wednesday, it's a chance for us to talk to Mike Griffith. Now, Mike not able to be with us today. Mike's taking a little bit of time off here today. So we're not going to do a Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update with Mike here today, but that doesn't mean I don't want you to check out our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau when it comes to your insurance needs. Georgia Farm Bureau, a great name to know for all of that because, listen, we're Georgians. I've lived in Georgia my entire life. I've been a part of communities here in our state for as long as I can remember. I'm talking about, going to church or youth league sports or all the things that kind of make a community, being involved in local schools and things like that. And that's the same thing our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are doing for you there as well. And when it comes to like the insurance products, when it comes to those kinds of things, it's so nice to know you've got someone on the other end of that phone call or the other end of that conversation that kind of knows what your life is like. They know the value of your vehicle because that's what you're using to get to work each and every day. That's your livelihood. That's how you support your family. Well, Georgia Farm Bureau understands that. So when you get your auto insurance through them, you're working with someone who kind of gets the story of your life. Same thing for your home insurance and things like that. It's one of the reasons why we say that Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. Always the home team. You can find them online at gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. Our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are going to take really good care of you. They're going to show you the way in which they can really step up to the plate and serve you because they're Georgians who want to take care of other Georgians. So make sure you check out our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau today online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. All right, before we're done today, a couple of things. There is some sort of mid-season, I don't call them awards because you can't get an award in the middle of the season, but there are some superlatives. That's maybe the word to give. Superlatives going out here, and it relates to a couple of Georgia players. We'll kind of give you some of that. Florida trying to maybe hold on to the past as it gets ready to take on Georgia coming up in a couple of weeks. We'll give you an example to laugh at as it relates to that. But on the serious note, a lot at stake here for Georgia in the coming weeks. Some history potentially being made. A guy who understands the ramifications of all that, our good friend Chip Towers from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Great to get a chance to catch up with him today. Happy to have all of you with us as part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And a good friend of mine and a great voice on the Georgia beat, knowing the story of this team, not just this year, but all years. It's Chip Towers. You can read him at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. You can increasingly see him doing some video stuff there with the AJC there as well. Our good friend Sarah Spencer, those two get together and do that a lot. Chip, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being here, and hope you're getting a chance to enjoy a little bit of an off week here right now. I don't really know that off week means the same thing that maybe it used to, but nonetheless, good to have you on the program here today.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. It's certainly a little bit slower, during the off week, but as Kirby reminds us at every turn, off week doesn't mean no practice, no work, and that extends to me and you as well.
That's exactly right. And I guess along these lines, here's what I'm kind of curious about from you, I guess, first of all. So we've now seen Georgia this year for 7 games. That means that, like, whatever comparison we would have been tempted to make between them and 2021, that's a little bit more far removed. We now have enough of a data set, sample size for this team that we can make evaluations of the current team that's sort of independent of whatever it was last year in a national championship season. How ready do you think Georgia appears to be for what's about to be a very different stretch of season than the one that's gone through up to this point?
Yeah, and Brandon, you're right. That's kind of the context that everything has to be put in, because we're all kidding ourselves if we think that, Georgia has played a difficult part of its schedule. The more difficult part lay in front of them. And so everything has to be taken in that perspective. That said, I mean, I think in a lot of ways Georgia might have outperformed my expectations for them. Certainly from a defensive standpoint, I thought there would be a little bit more of a struggle. Again, in the context of who you've played, they certainly haven't been going against the juggernauts, the offensive juggernauts they're going to face going forward. But, I mean, man, you're giving up 9 points a game. Last year they gave up 10.7 over the course of the whole season, and it was described as a generational defense, and you're doing most of that without your best defensive player, Jalen Carter. So, I think that's positive. I think those young linebackers are playing great. I think the D-line is playing pretty good, and the offensive line, especially here of late, seems to have come alive. That was a little bit of a question mark coming into the season. So all in all, I mean, I would say Georgia is in good shape for the gauntlet that awaits them, but it's still a gauntlet, and it has to be run, and there's still answers to be questions to be answered during that run.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jalen Carter a moment ago. Chip, I really think that injuries are a part of the story for Georgia right now. And I don't mean that it's the kind of injuries that remove them from contention or anything like that. But, I do think there's a chance this team might be a little bit more, I guess, dependent on a guy like that than maybe they were a year ago when the defense was so well balanced. You had so many great players that maybe you could have played a big game without somebody. And, offensively, I sort of feel the same way a little bit about A.D. Mitchell. I mean, last year Georgia missed George Pickens for almost the entirety of the season and clearly absorbed that okay. But, gosh, when you think about having to score points, the likes of which you might have to score to keep up with a team like Tennessee, having Mitchell healthy would be important. I don't know that Kirby gave Georgia fans a great update on either Carter or Mitchell yesterday. It certainly didn't sound like great news. Maybe it's not bad news, but it didn't sound like great news. And I do think that if you're a Georgia fan trying to process what's going on right now, I do think, especially when it comes to Mitchell and especially when it comes to Carter, I do think you have to think about injury status right now as a little bit of a determining factor into just how well you are set up for what comes next.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the truth. And look, it's the truth for everybody, especially at this point. 7 games in, you're going to be playing without players. Tennessee's playing without players. Florida's playing without players they depend on. But I think, with regard to Georgia, pretty much if you kind of pointed to a player on the offense and a player on the defense that you really couldn't afford to lose, I would say A.D. Mitchell and Jalen Carter probably fill that role pretty well. A.D. Mitchell, listen, the guy's 6'4", 190 pounds. He's a true X, a true split end. And whether it's George Pickens or A.D. Mitchell, you have to have that guy that you kind of know if you're Stetson Bennett, no matter what the down and distance, whatever you have to have, no matter what the coverage, no matter how much coverage they're drawing, you can throw to that guy and have a pretty good chance to have a catch. Now, the good news is I think Georgia has some other guys like that this year, certainly Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers and a few other guys. But, he's a guy you really didn't want to be playing without, certainly at this point of the season still. And then the flip side, Jalen Carter, everybody knows who Jalen Carter is. I agree with you. That wasn't a great report yesterday when you find out that Jalen Carter's still not on the practice field. In fact, he's in the training room. Now, the good news about that is everybody knows what Georgia has in Jalen Carter, and Jalen Carter knows what he's doing, once he gets on the field. But, you're also talking about a guy who's a supremely high NFL prospect. You have to protect these guys' health. You don't want to rush them back. Ultimately, it's going to be up to Jalen Carter and Ron Corson about whether he can go. Now, there's in the old days, you'd say, tape it up and go, kid. It's a big game. But that's not really the way it works anymore nowadays. So it's just going to be something we have to watch close. The flip side of that is, Zion Logue, Nazir Stackhouse, Dylan Bell, all these guys that are in there getting those reps. The point is eventually both those guys are going to be back, whether it's against Florida or further down the run. Everybody's circling that November 5th game against Tennessee. I think it's pretty clear that both of those guys should be able to be back for the Tennessee game. Mm-hmm. But this Florida game, let's not forget, it is those, what do you call them, the lousy, stinking Gators?
That's right, Chip.
You still got to play this one, and crazy things have happened in that series, certainly since 1933.
So Kirby Smart would hate what I'm about to ask you, but this is one of the things I did want to talk to you about today. If you look past Florida for a moment, which you and I are, of course, allowed to do, I just think that I think measurably November 5th is going to be the biggest home game in Sanford Stadium history. I know it sounds like it shouldn't be true, but Chip, as you're probably well aware, there have only been 2 previous top 5 matchups in the history of the stadium. Most recent was in 1983. The only other one came in 1942. None of those came when Georgia was ranked number 1, which by virtue of the AP poll, they probably will be. Now, the college football playoff poll, which comes out prior to that game, who knows how they'll handle this. They have a tendency to be a little bit different than the human polls sometimes. But I just think measurably this kind of stands up as the kind of game we haven't seen very much in Sanford Stadium history. And one of the things I was kind of curious about to hear from you is kind of where that lands with you, because, you will be able to kind of go back through the annals of your mind and think about the way that maybe, hey, games that didn't have the same ranking prestige this game is going to have did certainly have the build up in the moment. What comes close to you to what, assuming both these teams keep winning, that what could happen here on November 5th with the likes of which this game has a chance to be?
Yeah, well, it will be certainly with the rankings, the biggest game I've ever witnessed in San Francisco. Because, look, I fully expect those teams to be 1 and 2. If they take care of business between now and then, they should be 1 and 2. And let's just say they do what Vegas thinks, right? So, Georgia has a 17-point win over Florida, and Tennessee has a similar win a home win over Kentucky. Then those teams get ready. You're right. That comes out the same week as the college football playoff poll. And, all the other polls are fun, but the college football playoff rankings, not a poll, rankings, are the only ones that really matter. And I wouldn't be surprised if all of Tennessee gets the number one nod on that based on who they play. It does take strength of schedule into account, and
Right.
as well as the human polls and everything else. So there's a good chance Tennessee could actually be ranked one in the college football playoff rankings. Doesn't matter, 1, 2, whatever they are, they're going to play each other, and it's effectively almost an elimination game. I mean, the playoffs are upon us now, or they certainly will be then, because that's about getting to Atlanta and possibly, your college football playoff resume. So for all those reasons, it's huge. Now, listen, immediately the Mettenberger versus Murray LSU game springs to mind. There's been a bunch of times where Sanford Stadium was just on its ear, with excitement. But I don't see anything that I wasn't there. Unlike people believe, I wasn't there for that '83 game, and I wasn't there for. I wasn't there for a lot of those other great games. Certainly, I think Alabama in '76 was another one that was just like a crazy game and environment. But this
Chip,
one, it's going to be hard to beat.
Yeah, Chip, I talked to Tony Barnhart about this the other day because he obviously, does have a little bit longer, tenure on some of this kind of stuff. He mentioned the Georgia-Auburn game in 1971, and it's one of those things like, I like going back and reading about some of this kind of stuff, and so when he mentioned that, I went back and read about it. Like, from a ranking standpoint, it's not quite what this game has the potential to be, but there was a crazy amount of hype. There's a bunch of crazy stories about, like Georgia fans aggravating the Auburn team hotel before the game and things like that. So there's no shortage of, like, folklore around that game. Georgia didn't win. Pat Sullivan used that game as a springboard to the Heisman. So there's no shortage of folklore about certain games from the past, but from a ranking standpoint, they just won't quite have what this one has.
Yeah, no, and what's different, nowadays, college football is what it is. It's changed in so many ways, but, the college football playoff changes everything. Could you imagine if we were talking about a 12-team playoff right now? It'd be kind of different, but it is, it's just 4. And, there's scenarios where 3 SEC teams can get in there right now. But, the bottom line is you got to keep it simple, and the simple is getting to Atlanta. And that game on November 5th is going to go a long way to deciding that. And as well will this one in the cocktail party in Jacksonville. I mean, you really do have to take care of business first. And Florida's at that point now that, look, they're living to spoil somebody else's party. That's what they're living and breathing for at this moment. So you can't take that for granted. They've played a tougher slate probably than Georgia has, and they have some good things about them. Now they have some vulnerable things about them as well, and Georgia's just going to need to really be on their best game to get through that. Not only get through it and win it, but come out well and hopefully more healthy on the other side of it than they're going into it.
Hey, Chip, for the people who want even more Georgia coverage, remind them how they can find you at the AJC and all the cool stuff that you guys are doing here this season, because I want people to be aware of that.
Yeah, well, you can follow everything I do at C Towers AJC on Twitter, and we have the UGA Sports News Now Facebook page. I've resurrected the old Towers Take Live on there now, and as you mentioned, I'm doing a lot of video with the great Sarah Spencer, which I hate to cut down on the beauty factor of those shots, but she does a fantastic job of summing up Georgia just like you do, and those come out just about every day nowadays.
Well, Chip, it's great to have you on here. I really appreciate your time, and hope you do get a chance to enjoy a weekend maybe without some Georgia football, and then we'll see you down in Jacksonville coming up in a couple of weeks' time as well.
That's the plan. See you, pal.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good to catch up with Chip Towers here on the show. Chip and I talk fairly frequently, but don't get a chance to speak to him on air as much as maybe we used to in the past years ago. So fun to get a chance to do that here today. And, of course, glad to have all of you with us there, too. Maybe we'll even invite Chip to be a part of our DawgNation cruise coming up in May, or I should say April, excuse me. I don't know, where did May come from? It's not May, it's April. It's April. You think after I talk about this every day for how many different months in a row, I'd get it right. But nonetheless, it's time to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'll remind you that we are leaving April 24th on Independence of the Seas out of Port Canaveral, getting ready for a great time there, and want you to be a part of it there too. Now listen, here's the thing there as well. is you don't have to wait till April to go on your next Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation. I've got one coming up at the end of the season, looking forward to one kind of on the other side of like the recruiting stuff in February. February is kind of like my vacation, I don't want to say month because I don't take a whole month off, but it's where I kind of look to enjoy a little bit of vacation. It's kind of like one of those things that's sort of like right in between sort of the big pillars of my year. And so I like to kind of do that. And whatever your time frame is, it's a great time to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise. I mean, it's cold in Georgia today. Part of the reason why I like going on cruises in like December and February and things like that is I hate cold weather. I don't want to be cold. I want to be warm. I want to be basking in the sunshine of the Caribbean. I want to be floating on a float somewhere in the ocean. That's what I want to be doing. And, of course, that's what Royal Caribbean gives me a chance to do. So you can do that, too, with us in April, if nothing else. RoyalDogs.com. That's the website. RoyalDogs.com. You want to find out more about the DawgNation Cruise, about why it's going to be so much fun, what we did last year that made it so much fun. You want to do all of that. That's the website to do. RoyalDogs.com. And there's a great travel agent. Her name is Jessica Slater. She's specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to book our second ever DawgNation Cruise. The biggest one we've ever done. Going to be done right here in 2020, be spring of 2023. We want you to be a part of it. So give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She can tell you about all the cool stuff on board Independence of the Seas and how you can be a part of the special DawgNation events that we're doing there on the second ever DawgNation Cruise coming up this April. All right, so let's give you a couple of things here for a moment. We got a couple of mid-season superlatives that have kind of come out here, and I think a couple of these are pretty interesting. So the Joe Moore Award, and you'll remember back during spring practice, Cedric Von Granger, the Georgia center, said it was specifically the goal of Georgia to win that Joe Moore Award. They wanted to be acknowledged as the nation's best offensive line. I think goals are important in life, and I think expressing those goals clearly is probably a good step towards achieving them, and that's what Van Granger did, and so far so good, because the Joe Moore Award has announced its mid-season honor roll, and there's a handful of teams on here, 5 of which come from the SEC. One of those is Arkansas, which is not a contender right now. But I did notice this. The other 4 SEC teams that are on here, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. And those are the 4 teams that are also, in a roundabout way, competing for a spot in the SEC championship game 2, and then inside track to make the college football playoff. There is a strong possibility that more than one of those teams makes the playoff, but we know that those 4 are kind of in it, and it's probably Bama, Tennessee, Georgia more so than anybody else, but still, we'll put Ole Miss in that category for right now. So my question to you is simply this. Do you think it's oversimplified to say that of those 4 teams competing for a spot in the SEC championship, looking for a spot in the college football playoff, but also potentially with the nation's best offensive line, Ole Miss, Bama, Georgia, Tennessee, is it oversimplification to say the offensive line that plays the best from those 4 down the stretch will be the one that wins the SEC and most likely in the college football playoff? That may seem like it's oversimplified, but I believe it might be true. And if you want to think about this from the Georgia-centric perspective here for a moment, that's your task. You got to have an offensive line that plays better than the other guys do. And when you play Tennessee in a couple of weeks and likely Alabama in December, don't disrespect Ole Miss, you've got to do something to make their offensive line look bad. I promise you, we're going to spend a lot of time over the course of the next couple of weeks talking about the need to generate that pass rush, talking about the need to do big things up front defensively, somehow, some way. Not an easy task necessarily, but when you play Tennessee, you've got to make their offensive line look bad. That's guys like Darnell Wright and some of the names you know. You got to make them look bad. When you play Alabama, if you do, you got to make them look bad. And for the Georgia offensive line, it's got to find a way to look good when it matters most. That's what the national championship game was, right? When the national championship game came around, how did Georgia assert itself late? How did it upend the Alabama momentum? How did it bring home the national championship? Kick Jamari Salyer into the guard position, by the way, continuing to play very well as a rookie in the NFL, as we sort of thought he would. You kick Jamari inside. You put Broderick Jones at tackle. Boom. You assert yourself physically on the line of scrimmage offensively. That's what it is, right? Of these, there are 5 SEC teams on the kind of the midseason honor roll here. 4 of those are in contention for postseason stuff. And if you look at Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, all of these offensive lines getting talked about right now, offensive line that plays the best down the stretch is the one with the inside track to be back in the college football playoff and the inside track to be SEC champion coming up in a couple of weeks. I don't think it's too oversimplified to say it that way. Also, the Associated Press has come out with a midseason All-American team. Now, I don't remember ever doing this in the past. I'm sure they probably have. Maybe I just missed it. I'm not quite so sure. There's a whole lot of stock you put into like mid-season All-American. But it did notice that while there are a lot of SEC names on here, Hendon Hooker's the quarterback, Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee is also the wide receiver. You got Osiris Torrance, the center from Florida. Jahmyr Gibbs is sort of the all-purpose player. Will Anderson's the edge player. By the way, Will Anderson is not exactly having a Will Anderson season right now. Let's not let that get lost in the shuffle. He wasn't a huge factor in that Texas game or the Tennessee game. Don't let that escape your attention. That as of yet, Will Anderson hasn't exactly been Will Anderson, but maybe he will before the season's done. The point here is that while there are 8 SEC names on this list from the Associated Press, only one of those names is a Georgia player, and that is Christopher Smith, the safety. Now, did somebody get snubbed or whatever else? I honestly don't know. That's not really my point here right now. My point is this. If you want to see Georgia go for 2 in 22, you're going to have some big-time individual performers emerge. It's one of the reasons why we push getting the ball to Brock Bowers more, because he's the guy on offense we think has the best chance of doing that. Defensively, it's one of the reasons why you want to see Nolan Smith have that big statement in the second half of this season, or Jalen Carter come back from injury because he's obviously maybe the guy that's most likely to do that. One of the freshmen stepping up in a big way, like a Mikael Williams, or Malachi Starks is somebody you have to put in that category. But right now, I would say Georgia is one of the areas in which they're kind of falling short of the national championship standard is with individual players playing at a superstar level. Last year, you had it. You had 5 first-round picks on defense. You had the number 1 overall pick. You had the Butkus Award winner. You had individual players kind of playing at a superstar level. Bowers had, 15 touchdowns, I think, a year ago? That's a superstar-type performance. Individual players playing at a superstar level. And right now, one of the ways in which Georgia's kind of not quite at that standard right now is the individual guys who are really going out there and having these massive, massive performances. It's not easy to measure that necessarily, but you sort of know it when you see it. And right now, Georgia just needs a little bit more of that. You need more game-wrecking players, game-wrecking plays defensively. You need a little bit more highlight stuff on offense. One mid-season All-American, to the extent that you take this seriously whatsoever, is a little bit of a snapshot of what Georgia still can do. You can have some individual guys step up. Every national champion, you've heard us say this before, has about a half dozen first-team All-SEC guys, about a half dozen first-round picks, either in this upcoming draft or an eventual draft. You've got top-end performers on a national championship team. Who are your top-end performers on Georgia right now? It's time to figure that out. It's time to find out who that is. If you're looking for a step that Georgia hasn't taken yet, that it still needs to take, I'd say that's probably an example of that. One more thing here really quick. So yesterday we told you on the show that Florida's only 3-11 in its last 14 SEC games, which is worth laughing at. And we were just kind of talking about that a little bit. And I saw where Steve Spurrier was asked about this. He was on the Pat Dooley podcast. Pat Dooley covered Florida for 8 million years and does a podcast now. And Spurrier was on the show, and he asked Spurrier about that record. And is like, it used to take us, I forget exactly what the quote was, but something to the effect of, it used to take us 10 or 11 years to lose 10 or 11 conference games. Something along those lines. And I was thinking to myself, this is kind of when you're getting pretty close to rock bottom as a program, and Florida is, although they hope they are anyway. They hope this is rock bottom. It doesn't get worse from here. But when you start doing the remember wins, the boy, and listen, I love the past too. I sit here and talk to you about old stuff, all day long. If it's 100 years old, I love it. So I'm not against the past necessarily, far from it, to be truthful. But when the only thing you can do is trot out the old coach and have him say, boy, remember how good it used to be? That's an indication that things right now aren't as good as they're supposed to be. And things are not great for Billy Napier right now, and they're probably about to get worse with Georgia coming up. And as we said on the show yesterday, we think it's Georgia's job to actually make it worse. Hold them down even longer. Prevent any first-year momentum for building for Napier whatsoever. And coming up in a couple of weeks' time, that's exactly what Georgia has a chance to do, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And don't forget that on Friday here on the DawgNation video channels, Friday night in particular, even though there's no Georgia game to pick, we do have some big spreads to give you here. So we do have some spreads we want to give you here, and some games we'll be talking about. We'll still make some picks for the games this weekend, even though there is no Georgia game. In fact, let's give you a little bit of a preview of this. These are some of the games we're going to pick when it comes to go with the flow here on Friday. We'll give you a couple of early looks at this. One of our video commenters before the show began today was talking about South Carolina hosting Texas A&M. I believe this is a trophy game. Is this something for is it Davy Crockett? I thought he was from Tennessee, or is it Daniel? Some sort of trophy. They play for some sort of trophy. I think somebody from South Carolina fought in the Alamo, and now they have a trophy for South Carolina, Tennessee. Or I should say South Carolina, Texas A&M. I believe I'm right about that. Either way, Gamecocks 3-point underdog at home against the Aggies. How about Alabama trying to shake off the doldrums against Texas A&M as a 21-point home favorite? Of course, the Bulldogs trying to shake things off there as well. They were a touchdown favorite, at least this time a week ago, at Kentucky. Lost the game outright, so they got some work to do there. Magnolia Bowl sees LSU as a favorite against Ole Miss. That can't be right. Is that right? That can't be right. Let's check that. Ole Miss going to LSU on Saturday. Game is in LSU. We might want to check that there a little bit. And then Iowa's at Ohio State as a 29-point favorite of the Buckeyes. Somebody joked online that Ohio State will probably win 29-0. Just given the fact that Iowa can't score against anybody, although they do have a very good defense. So this is an amazing clash of styles between the Buckeyes and the Hawkeyes, number 29. And then Clemson in an ACC test against the surprising undefeated Syracuse Orange. Our operations guy around here, BJ Swinney, big Syracuse fan, so I know he's happy to see Syracuse and the year they're having under Dino Babers getting a chance to play Clemson on Saturday. Can I see that full screen one more time, because I just want to make sure I give the spread. 13.5 for the Tigers hosting Syracuse there on Saturday. And we'll check that Magnolia Bowl spread for you between Ole Miss and LSU. I have a suspicion that's maybe not quite right. But either way, fun slate of games. We'll pick those for you on MyBookie coming up on the weekend. Go with the flow, presented by R.S. Andrews there as well. And by the way, whatever the spreads are and however you want to get involved here this weekend, you get a chance to do that with our friends at MyBookie. Open up a brand new account. You're going to get a big deposit bonus. That means up to $1,000, they'll match your deposit. You put in $500, they'll put in $500 for you. You literally have $1,000 before you even place and win your first bet. And that's how it works with MyBookie. Could not be simpler. You play, you win, you get paid. You take advantage of the big deposit bonus, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation in order to be able to do that. So simply find MyBookie online. Just type it into your browser. The internet will do the work for you. And then after that, open up your account, put in your money, $600. They'll give you $600. $800, they'll give you $800. All the way up to $1,000, they'll do that for you. And then you play, you win, you get paid. It is winning season there at MyBookie. Anything, anywhere, anytime. You can do that with our friends there at MyBookie. So make sure you check that out today. Also, one more thing to check out before we wrap up here. Heading towards the weekend, we're always loving our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Think about the cocktail party coming up in a couple of weeks. Our cocktail of choice is the Finish Long Drink, whether it's the Long Drink Cranberry, the Long Drink Strong, Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. The traditional in the blue can, got the grapefruit flavor with the gin kick. All of that stuff goes great there on all of that. And we want to celebrate you coming up this Friday there as well, as you enjoy the Finish Long Drink. However you enjoy it, whatever your choice is on all of that, whatever you're doing here on this off week for Georgia, having some fun and taking care of some really good stuff, well, make sure you are sharing those photos with us, and we'll celebrate you on a segment we like to call the Big Finish, presented by the Finish Long Drink. So we'll see you there on Friday for that. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. Share those with me, and I'll share them with everybody else of you enjoying the Finish Long Drink. We'll continue to get the word out that the Finish Long Drink, a great way to make any day feel like the weekend. Of course, you haven't tried some. If you go to the website, thelongdrink.com, put in your zip code, you can find out where you can pick up some today. That's thelongdrink.com for more with our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And we'll see you Friday for the Big Finish, presented by the Finish Long Drink, coming up there as well. So we have a great golden shoe today, and I want to show this to you. So somebody was kind enough to share this with me yesterday. I want to read this to you, then I want to kind of zoom in and let you see this a little bit closer. So let me show the first one here to you of a big dog fan that just celebrated a great wedding. Adrian Mitchum sends this to me. He says, I married my beautiful wife, Lois, last Friday. Check out that perfect groom's cake. And you better believe that while giving my speech, I reminded everyone that it's 5,027 days, which was the number at that point, since those lousy, stinking Gators last won a national championship. It gives you hashtag go for 2 in 22, hashtag forever Mitchum. What an awesome, awesome wedding that appears to be. And I want to zoom in. Let's show the next screen here. How about this groom's cake? For those of you not watching on video, this is art. You got the bottom layer that's kind of got like the motif of the Georgia pants with the silver breeches and the stripes going down. The national championship trophy on top. It's amazing what cake technology is these days, and I don't think I've seen a better looking cake than that. It looks like a very happy couple and a gorgeous, unbelievable wedding. So our heartfelt celebration on all of that. That just looks incredible. So thank you so much for sharing that. Golden shoes all the way around for that. And extra points for using the hashtag go for 2 in 22. And by the way, how about a Gator Hater update? It was 5,027 days then. It's 5,032 days right now. Florida has been dealing with misery for as long as anybody can remember. And we love that around here. And we'll remind you that 10 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville. We love the cocktail party, and we can't wait to be there to watch Georgia beat up on Florida again. Y'all have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can check them out today. And by the way, if you go to the top of the page at DawgNation.com, or even click this little QR code thing we have, we'll show it to you. You can get the original Gator Hater logo. I believe we haven't read. You can get the original Gator Hater logo back on a T-shirt again. A lot of folks wondered, hey, BA, when are you going to do those Gator Hater T-shirts again? Years ago, we sold hundreds and hundreds of these things, if not thousands, and they kind of went, like the old Disney vault. They kind of went into the DawgNation vault for a while, and now they're back. And you can get one at the DawgNation store. So use that QR code. It'll get you there. And you can be a part of that. Or just click the link there at the top of the page at DawgNation.com. In addition to that, you got the Eddie the Blind Squirrel shirt. You get the Lousy Stinking Gators. And by the way, how about Chip Towers? Shout out to Chip for giving the Lousy Stinking Gators plug today there as well. So you can get that. And by the way, I got the Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt here too. So boom, there you go on that. And if you're wondering why I don't wear the t-shirt's a little snug on me right now. So now the shirts all fit great. I just happen to have maybe, not the perfect size for me. But that's why I always hold it up and don't wear it. Although eventually I'll probably wear it because I'm getting down to an acceptable weight here. Okay, so LSU is a 1.5-point favorite in this game. That's straight from my bookie. So my apologies to both Michael Carvel, who had the spread, my bookie, who posted it. I mean, I guess. So you're saying that Ole Miss is a 1.5-point favorite on a neutral field. LSU 1.5-point favorite there. I mean, I guess you beat Florida, and all of a sudden now you're a favorite over an undefeated team. So there you go. Yeah, 125 on the money line, plus 102 on Ole Miss. So you're not getting a ton of value to take them as an underdog there, but there you go. So my apologies. That was the correct spread. So maybe that's a little bit of an early lean for me on that. But I mean, it can't last forever for Ole Miss, and maybe at Baton Rouge is the place where it comes to an end. But I doubted that spread, and as it turns out, I was wrong. Let us see. Zone 6 says that's a bait pick. I mean, look. It sort of seems that way to me, but I mean, how long is Ole Miss going to stay undefeated? I guess that's the question you have to ask yourself. Connor Hill says LSU is garbage. So clearly, by thinking the spread was wrong, I was indicating that I'm an Ole Miss lean on that right now. But let me try to think how they were thinking. I mean, Jaden Daniels did play better last week. My biggest issue with LSU has been the fact that I don't think that Daniels has played particularly well. It seemed like the game against Florida had the potential to be a little bit of a galvanizing moment for LSU. So while my initial instinct is to say I'm all Ole Miss there, maybe that's what they're kind of counting on. I don't know. Tyson Kiefer says, is Billy Napier possibly the Florida version of Brian Harsin? I don't think so, because I think that Napier has far more of a plan. Like, I'm a Gator hater through and through. I'm not convinced that Billy Napier is going to be a great coach, but Brian Harsin did not have much of a plan at Auburn. They had no ability to retain key assistants. Horrible relationship with Mike Bobo, horrible relationship with Derek Mason. Derek Mason's actually doing pretty good things right now as the Oklahoma State defensive coordinator, and Harsin couldn't get along with either guy, I'm left to presume. Other assistants you've had similar issues with. The Auburn recruiting footprint is about as big as the head of a pin right now. So you've completely shrunk the area in which you recruit. You've got no assistants who are able to go out there and, establish any kind of key relationships. And so by comparison, Billy Napier's doing way more than that. Napier's got a big staff. You remember that team picture we kind of joked about? And I don't even know why this is so funny, but it's like at the beginning of the year, you got like 100 players. You got like 500 staffers, what looked to be like just hundreds of staffers all gathered around them. So from an organizational standpoint, I think that Napier's probably a step up from even where Dan Mullen was. Now, will he win as many games? I don't know. Will he have Florida in the top 10 eventually? I don't know. But there's clearly an organizational structure that Napier has put in place there. There are other issues related to Florida, but I don't think that Napier is going to be a Harsin. I don't. Jeremy Little ain't going. I'm not talking about it. I saw it. I'm not talking about it. I don't have anything to say about it right now. I just don't know what it is. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, at this point in time, I'm going to exercise my right to say no comment. James F., at this point in time, I'm going to exercise my right to say no comment. Andrew Hughes, at this point in time, I'm going to exercise my right to say no comment. And maybe I'm wrong for doing that. I just don't know. I don't know what to say. I have obviously seen it. I'm aware of it. I just don't have a comment right now. Kirby's visor. Like, here's my thing. Sometimes, let me just go back to my original statement. I'm going to exercise my right to say no comment right now. Jonathan Aaron says, since Peyton Manning was the game day picker at Tennessee, if we get game day like we should for Tennessee, who should be our guest picker? Yeah, I don't know. It's not always like a hometown guy, although oftentimes it is. I think it was, Chase Elliott one time last year. Chase is a huge Georgia fan. Peyton was it. Who would be a really good one? That's a good question. Has Quavo done it? I know that that would do the Georgia brand some good because he's very popular and obviously a big Georgia fan. Has he done it before? Noah Sheldon would like to see Nick Chubb or Isaiah McKenzie. Actually, that would be my answer. Chubb getting revenge on the Tennessee turf, which prematurely ended his 2015 season. That would be my pick right there. Nick Chubb coming back. Obviously, all's well that ends well. He's gone on to great things. Tennessee still, not as of yet. So Nick Chubb would be the best answer. I don't know that they're off that day. I honestly don't know what the Browns' schedule is, but that'd be my answer right there. Zebulon Owen says, how about BA for guest picker? Listen, if called upon, I will serve. John Hendricks says Jordan Davis. He'd be a good one too. I guess that's it. It's like, who are who's on bye week that week for Georgia, and could you bring them? Or NFL guys that played at Georgia, but one of those guys coming back would be great. Frank Patterson says you could argue that Nick Chubb might break Herschel Walker's record at Tennessee, not hit him 4 yards out of bounds. That's interesting. Had he had a full 2015 season, boy, you're right. A lot more stats could have come his way. That's true. Zebulon Owen said he made me smile. Yes, indeed. You sure did. Let's see what else. Charles Kaiser says Herschel Walker for guest picker. I believe Herschel's a little busy right now. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is going on. Ryan Walker about the wife who allowed the cake. Yeah, I mean, so when we got married, I had a groom's cake. So you have like the wedding cake and you have a groom's cake. I'm guessing that may have been the groom's cake. And first of all, if you ever go to a wedding, like the groom's cake is always the way to go. Like the wedding cake is typically like fancy, or maybe it's got like some sort of like some sort of fruit, whatever, tied in with it. But the groom's cake is typically like cake. And like I had a Georgia themed groom's cake for my wedding, but this is like back in the early 2000s. Our cake technology just wasn't anywhere near as built out as it appears to be today. So like groom's cakes are kind of a thing, but I'm just amazed at like how that's a work of art. It's amazing. And I've known people who kind of do some of this cake stuff. It's just amazing how good they are at it. Because like the way it works is that outer layer is, what do you call it? Is it mascarpone or something like that? You say it? So it's edible, but like the real cake stuff is like once you get through that layer. The outer layer is what makes it look pretty, but you kind of cut through that and you get like the regular frosting and stuff on the inside of that. So technically speaking, while the outer layer is edible, you kind of sort of peel that off and you sort of eat what's underneath there. At least I do anyway. But it looked like a great wedding, an amazing wedding. Barry Watkinson, subject of the night game thing. Yeah, I mean, the issue is the Bama-Tennessee game drew 11.5 million people at 3:30. 11.5 million people. Like, of course CBS is going to want the biggest game they can have at 3:30. This is the thing. It's like, I know that like fans who attend the games want the night game. I'd like to have one too. But it's not one of those deals of it's more prestigious to play at night when the number one pick goes to the 3:30. And look, in a couple of years, CBS is going to be out of this. I'm actually going to be sad to see CBS go because I like CBS's coverage. But when they're out of this, when the big ticket is probably the ABC game, that more likely will be at night. And you're just going to get a lot more of that at that point in time. You'll probably have more night games when the full TV media rights deal is connected to ESPN, ABC. When that happens, you're going to have a lot more night games, I'm guessing. But for now, 3:30 is just the number one overall pick. And I just don't think, I know Connor did a video about this the other day. I just don't think there's much precedent for CBS not exercising that pick on the very best game it can get. I just don't think they would. So yeah. Let's see what else here on the Facebook side for a moment. Trying to scroll past the thing I'm not commenting about. Greg Chowler's in the possibility that Georgia could play Michigan again. I mean, listen, I'll give Michigan credit. I didn't expect them to do what they did last Saturday against Penn State. They did, so they are better right now than I thought they were. Penn State probably not as good right now as I thought it was. But I do agree with Greg on this. How in the world are you going to sell a Georgia-Michigan playoff game again? How in the world do you sell that after what you saw a year ago? I just don't know how you do. I don't know how you do. Gary Holt says teams know about Brock Bowers now, and they don't want him running wild, so other players are going to have to step up and take pressure off of Brock. As we said during the show a minute ago, you do need some more players to step up. You do need some more individual guys to have superstar-type seasons. You probably do need more in that right now. Carter Lawson says he's looking for 46 tickets to the Tennessee game. I'm sure not alone, but please let me know. Carter, I do wish you best of luck with that. I guess my thought process on this is, I mean, they can't get much more expensive than they already are, right? I mean, and maybe, loudmouths like me keep hyping up the game. Maybe they're just going to drive the prices up. But, I mean, because I wouldn't mind, buying a couple myself or some people in my life. But I mean, right now they're really expensive. They're crazy expensive. So maybe the market will soften at some point in time. But right now it's pretty expensive. Let's see what else. Yeah, Brian Whitehead also talking about the thing we're not talking about. Randy Hall says we're going to get Eddie some new motif. So here's the thing about Eddie. Like, Eddie's a little bit like Mickey Mouse in that once you get used to him a certain way, and I guess Mickey Mouse got – that's the wrong comparison because Mickey Mouse got 12 million costumes. But I'm sort of happy with the way Eddie is. I like the simplicity of Eddie. Eddie's got the blindfold and he's got the sign. And to me, that's about all he needs. Plus, it makes it a little bit easier to kind of like do artist renderings of him. Dog says if we don't blow the Gators away, Tennessee could move ahead of us in the rankings. Would it be great if they were favored? We wouldn't. We'd definitely play with a chip on our shoulder. I mean, it is possible that the playoff committee will put Tennessee at 1 prior to that game. It's the kind of thing they would just typically do. They like to be just different enough from the AP poll, and a lot of their rankings sometimes seem to be a little bit of a hype for an upcoming game. And so ranking Tennessee 1 prior to playing Georgia, who was number 1, would just sort of fit sort of the pro wrestling style storyline that sometimes they seem to favor. Matt Rukavine on the subject of Justice Haynes visiting. I know Jeff Sintel wrote about this. So here's my take on this, and I'm sure we'll probably do more on the show about this at some point in time. This is what really strong programs have the ability to do, the willingness to marshal resources to do. So do I think that Justice Haynes is a rock-solid Alabama commit? I kind of do. Do I think that Georgia should host him on as many visits he wants to take to UGA? I kind of do. There are some programs that are not going to do a lot of like red carpet for you on visits if they don't think you're going there. We've seen this before of, so-and-so wanted to take this is not an official visit, but so-and-so wanted to take an official visit and kind of got turned down. Like, we're not paying the money for you to come here if we know you're not going here. We're not going to give you a free vacation. I'm assuming that Georgia would never do that. That Georgia's got enough of a recruiting budget that if a player wants to come here, it's never a bad thing to be good to a good player. And I think that Justice Haynes is a good player. Whether it be, hey, who knows what the future holds for anybody. I'm talking about the near-term future, the long-term future, whatever else. So do I believe that Haynes is rock-solid to Alabama? Yeah, right now I guess I probably do. Do I think that Georgia would be wise to host him on as many visits he wants to take? I think they probably would, and that's all this is. This is a program like Georgia showing its program strength by hosting visitors who may have clearly stated their intention not to come here. But listen, it's all about how you can keep in touch, and this is a good way to keep in touch. Let's see what else. Brian Whitehead said he had heard that Herschel might already be in Athens for the Tennessee game. Could be the guest picker for sure. Maybe that's the case. I'm guessing, and listen, we don't talk about politics at all, ever, never will. I am guessing because Herschel is a current candidate for office. My guess is ESPN probably steers clear of that. That's what my guess probably is. I mean, we've interviewed Herschel a couple of times, over the last couple of years, and we've, very, strictly kept it to football. But we're also, a Georgia-themed show, and Herschel is a Georgia player. ESPN might have a slightly different view of that. My guess is they, might not want to go active candidate for office the Saturday before the election. That's my guess. They might not want to do that. And that's as close to politics as I'm going to get. Brian Jones says when it comes to return to health, we need A.D. Mitchell more than Jalen Carter. That's interesting. He says it'd also be nice to get them both back. That's interesting. I don't know that I would quite agree with that. I still think that Carter is – I think Carter's the best player on this team when healthy. And I think that he's more irreplaceable than anybody that Georgia had on last year's team. I think that. Now you say, well, how could that be true? They're playing without him right now. That's true, but they're also about to play more important games. I think you really want Jalen Carter out there if you can get him. I think you really want him out there if you can get him. All right, final comments. We got to get ready to go. Somebody asked about Kentucky, Tennessee. Yeah, Kentucky, Tennessee's not until next week. I mean, you sort of wish it was right now, just for the entertainment factor of it. But any kind of like potential letdown usually kind of wears off after about a week or so. Let's see what else. Over here on YouTube again. First String Lawn Care. Yeah, I mean, we've kind of done the sling blade thing with him a little bit. Billy Napier sort of looks like the Billy Bob Thornton character. We've kind of done that a little bit. For a while, every time we played a Napier clip, we would kind of do the thing that Billy Bob Thornton did, but I don't think everybody got that, so we stopped doing that. Bama Boy says that he's hearing whispers that Ohio State defense is better this year. Have no clue where this notion came from, considering they have yet to play any real genuine competition. They played one school above 500. I think that's fair. I am curious to see, they play they play Penn State coming up in a couple of weeks, and obviously Penn State just got blasted by Michigan, but that game is in State College, and I'm guessing, Bama Boy, that all these team names. I am guessing that Ohio State is going to try to play better defense in some of its bigger games this year. I think it knows it got out-physicaled last year against Michigan. I don't think it wants that to happen anymore. So two areas which I think Ohio State has improved, or at least they hope they've improved. And you're right. We'll find out when they play somebody that matters. So far this year, they haven't. I think they hope they're better defensively, and I think they believe they're better along the offensive line. And that's a pretty big deal for a program that I think the last couple of years I don't think has quite been Ohio State-level offensive line, not nation's best offensive line type stuff, but with like Paris Johnson, some of those guys, new offensive line coach in place there, I do think they think they're better along the offensive line. I think they want to use that. And defensively, I know they knew they needed to get better. Now they believe they are. And I do believe you could see, much like the Notre Dame game was, I think you could see a little bit of a defensive-oriented game plan from them when they play some of their bigger games. Because remember, against Notre Dame to begin the season, I think they only had one play that day in excess of like 20, 25 yards. Like the big explosive stuff they typically get. They didn't get a lot of that against Notre Dame, and some of that might have been, I don't want to say by choice. You don't choose not to have explosive plays. But their game plan was willing to sacrifice some of their explosive stuff because they wanted that Jim Knowles defense to have a good first game against Notre Dame. And they were fine with a lower scoring game because they wanted to make a statement defensively. And I think that Ryan Day certainly tried to act like they did, even though we found out that Notre Dame is, once again, overrated, not very good. But when you start thinking about Penn State, into the season against Michigan, I think in those particular games, I think you could see a little bit more of a defensive-oriented game plan. By the way, the NFL, which was like essentially flag football a couple of years ago, that's a league that's also kind of trending back more towards running game and defense right now. It sort of seems like, too. Look at the way the Falcons are playing, for goodness sakes. But I totally agree with you that Ohio State hasn't had an opportunity to prove whether it's good defensively or not. But clearly that's what they want to be thought of. And so when you start playing a Penn State in a couple of weeks or, bigger games down the stretch, I think they are going to try to lean on their defense. I don't think they want to win 50-30. I don't. I think they know that their missing ingredient is that toughness, that physicality, and I think they're going to try to demonstrate some of that on defense. Lesko says, can you talk about how quick our defensive line was off the ball? Warren Brinson was in our backfield before Swan had the ball in his hands from under center on several plays. Yeah, they're playing very well without Jalen Carter right now because obviously Carter's quickness as a defensive lineman is one of the things that's probably the thing that makes him a top 5 pick. And right now Georgia's showing some of that without him. I think you're probably right about that. Kirby's Belt says Ohio State has been focusing on defense. They actually said defense wins big games. Less of a high-powered offense against good teams and equal focus on defense. Kirby's Belt, I think you're probably right about that. Kirby's Visor also talking about how good Big Bear Alexander already is, and I think that's probably true too. I've liked what I've seen from him. All right, final comments, then we are gone. Let's see what else we can get. Sometimes the Facebook comments don't refresh like I think they should. Travis McCullough says, if Ohio State is better in the areas they are claiming, they need to be showing that dominance in all their games. That's fair. I think that's fair. El Senor checks in to say, Tennessee's hurry-up offense is legit, gave Bama fits. I'm curious to see how Kirby attacks, considering we sub a lot on defense. I think that's fair, too. There's no doubt Tennessee's a very good team offensively, and there's no doubt there are some challenges associated with facing this Tennessee team, and you got to be ready for it. Joel Moody says, if I had to make a college football playoff championship game pick right now, I'd say Georgia over Ohio State. Can you imagine? What if Georgia played Ohio State in the national semifinal in Atlanta? The tickets would be $8 million. $8 million. First of all, Georgia playing a playoff game in Atlanta would drive them up. Columbus is actually not that far from here. There's a ton of Ohio State fans that already live in Atlanta. You hadn't seen these two teams play since 92. The hype for Georgia-Ohio State in a playoff game would be unbelievable. Now, if you play it in L.A. in the championship game, that's going to be a little bit different because all of a sudden that becomes simply a matter of who can get that far out west for the game. But if you played that as a semifinal game in Atlanta, oh my gosh. I mean, can you just imagine? Can you imagine? Now, my guess is, look, the winner of the SEC championship game should be playing the semifinal in Atlanta. Because you got to remember, this year, playoffs are Atlanta, Glendale, championship in L.A. So whoever gets sent out to Arizona, if you win, you're probably just staying out there. You're probably not coming back home, which is a long time to be gone, but you'll probably treat it like an NFL thing. So I believe that the winner of the SEC championship game should be given the number one seed. And I don't believe the number one seed should be playing Ohio State in Atlanta. I believe it should be Ohio State SEC runner-up in Arizona, and that means, gosh, can you imagine Georgia Clemson in Atlanta or Georgia Michigan in Atlanta? That'd be a little bit less so, but that's kind of the way I think that should play out. Daniel says Facebook's been screwed up. I hate that. I hope that's not the case, but I hate that. Craig Wasick says, I sold my Tennessee tickets at the beginning of the year, and I'm regretting it now. I don't believe you could buy them back for what you sold them for, I'm guessing. I'm guessing you probably couldn't. Joel Moody says, my wife's an Ohio State graduate, but she's a Georgia Bulldog fan now. Joel, that's a good man right there. That's spreading the good word, good news right there. I like to see that. All right, we're going to go. Good stuff. Anson McMahon says no price would be good enough for me to sell my tickets. And listen, I can't wait to see a lot of Georgia fans filling up that stadium in a few weeks, and obviously heading down to Jacksonville before that. Y'all, this is the fun stuff, man. This is where it gets great, and it's about to be really, really great. Really, really great here over the course of the next couple of weeks. All right, so check out the AJC online, ajc.com. Our buddy Chip Towers went earlier. You can follow him there at the AJC. Also, all kinds of stuff when it comes to the Hawks beginning their season tonight. Michael Cunningham's got a good look at that. You're going to follow the rest of the baseball playoffs, kind of post-Braves inclusion. You can do that. Also a story up about the future of the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville. You can read that online at the AJC. And how about the fall dining guide? This is the time of year when a lot of folks like to get dressed up and go out to nice dinners, heading towards the holiday season. They have a really good fall dining guide online at the AJC there as well, so you can check that out. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Also, big thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. You'll have a great day. We will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.